My wife Sophia and I had been together for 3 years, married for 2. We were both doing well in our careers and had recently started looking for our first home. Almost every weekend we'd visit open houses, imagining where we'd one day raise a family. I never questioned our future, until the day I accidentally found my wife's secret bank account. Within minutes, everything I believed about my marriage came crashing down. It happened on an ordinary Saturday. Sophia had gone grocery shopping while I stayed home gathering paperwork for our mortgage pre-approval. As I pulled out our tax folder, another file slipped from behind it and scattered across the floor. One statement caught my attention. It wasn't from our bank. It was addressed only to Sophia. At first I assumed it was an old account she'd forgotten to close. Then I noticed the date, 2 weeks ago. My stomach tightened. The balance read $48,372.16. There were more statements underneath, small deposits, every month, for years. Why would someone secretly save money for years, unless they were preparing for a life without me? I carefully put everything back exactly where I'd found it. I said nothing. If Sophia was planning to leave me, the last thing I wanted was for her to know I'd discovered her plan. For the next 3 days, I looked for answers. Not because I wanted to spy on my wife, because I didn't want to be the last person to know my own marriage was over. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. She smiled while reading a message. I wondered who had sent it. She said she'd be home a little late because month-end reports were keeping everyone back. For the first time, I questioned whether she was really at work. One evening, she left her laptop open on the dining table while she answered the door. I walked toward it, stopped, then walked away. If I had to become that man just to save my marriage, maybe I'd already lost it. Everything else looked painfully normal. She still called me during lunch, still asked which house I liked best, still argued with me over whether we needed a bigger backyard. Nothing about Sophia had changed, only the way I was looking at her. The more I watched, the less anything made sense. If there was another man, where was the evidence? If she was planning another life, why was she still planning one with me? By the third night, I'd made a decision. I was going to quietly meet a lawyer, separate our finances, prepare myself before she blindsided me. It sounded sensible. It lasted until she came home that evening carrying my favorite takeout. "I drove past that neighborhood we liked," she said with a smile. "There's another house for sale. We should go see it this weekend." I looked at her. The woman I'd built my life with. The woman I wanted to grow old with. I realized I couldn't spend weeks pretending everything was fine while secretly preparing for a divorce. I needed the truth. I placed the bank statements on the kitchen island. The smile disappeared from her face. She didn't ask where I'd found them. She already knew. I looked straight into her eyes. "Why?" Her lips trembled. No words came. I asked again. "Why?" Tears filled her eyes. "I never wanted you to find out like this." "That's not an answer." Silence. Finally, I asked the question that had been tearing me apart for 3 days. "Who is he?" She looked up immediately. "There isn't anyone." "Then who were you building this future with?" "No one." I swallowed hard. "Then when were you planning to leave me?" She shook her head, tears running down her face. "I wasn't." "Then help me understand." She opened her mouth. Nothing. Only 2 words escaped. "I'm sorry." I picked up my keys. "Daniel," she whispered. I paused at the door but never turned around. I walked out convinced my marriage was over. I just didn't know. I was asking the wrong question. I drove around for almost an hour before I realized I had nowhere to go. Eventually, I ended up at my friend Ethan's apartment. He looked at my face, handed me a spare key and said, "You can stay here." That night my phone never stopped ringing. Sophia, again, and again, and again. I couldn't answer. The voicemails kept coming. "Daniel, please come home. Please let me explain. Please." I listened to every one of them. I still couldn't bring myself to call her back. The next morning my phone rang again. This time it was her father. "Daniel, if you're willing, I'd like to see you." I almost refused, but something in his voice made me pause. An hour later, I was sitting across from Michael Bennett. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he let out a long sigh. "I honestly thought Sophia would have told you." "We all did." He looked at me. "She told me what happened last night. I know you're hurt, and I'm not here to tell you you're wrong." He took another slow breath. "I just need you to know one thing. My daughter went through the worst financial betrayal of her life before she ever met you. The man she was going to marry convinced her to hand over everything she had. Her savings, her wedding fund, everything she'd worked for. And then he vanished from her life." Michael lowered his head. "He left her emotionally broken. He left her financially broken. He shattered her trust. It took months of therapy before she could even begin putting her life back together." Silence filled the room. Little by little, we started getting our daughter back. Then she met you. For the first time, we saw her truly happy again. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Daniel, please don't decide anything today. Just talk to her. Listen to her. I know one thing with absolute certainty. My daughter loves you very much." His voice broke. "I almost lost her once. I can't lose her again." Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, I stood up. Michael walked me to the door. He didn't say another word. Neither did I. I got into my car and drove home. When I walked back into the house, Sophia was still sitting where I'd left her. The bank statements lay untouched on the kitchen island. She looked exhausted. So did I. I sat down across from her. "I'm here. I'll listen." She took a deep breath and began. "Ryan didn't take everything overnight," she said quietly. "We were engaged, planning a wedding, talking about buying a house. Little by little, he convinced me to move my savings into what he called our future. Every transfer sounded reasonable. Every promise sounded sincere." She stopped for a moment. Then one morning, he disappeared. With him went her savings, her wedding fund, and every plan she'd spent years building. She paused for a long moment. The money wasn't the worst part. I felt like he'd made a fool out of me. I couldn't face anyone after that. My parents, my brother, my friends. It felt like everyone was looking at me with pity, wondering how I could have trusted someone so completely. I moved back in with my parents. I stopped answering calls. I shut myself away from everyone. Depression followed. Months of therapy slowly helped me stand on my feet again. Eventually, I went back to work. That's where I met you. A faint smile crossed her face. You gave me hope again. That was all she said. No speeches, no excuses, just the truth. The room fell silent. I had imagined this conversation many times over the past 2 days. None of those versions looked anything like this. Finally, I stood up. It's late. I need time to process everything. She nodded without saying a word. That night I slept in the guest room. She quietly closed the bedroom door behind her. The next morning there was a gentle knock. When I opened the door, Sophia was standing there holding a cup of coffee. She looked nervous. I took the cup from her hand. For the first time since all this began, I saw a little relief in her eyes. We stood outside in silence. After a few moments I asked, "How much did he take?" She told me. It was enough to change someone's life. And you never fought him? She slowly shook her head. My parents wanted me to. My brother did too. They even spoke to people about taking legal action. She looked out into the distance. But I wasn't trying to win. I was just trying to survive. When I finally got my life back together, I promised myself I'd never be that helpless again. So I opened another account. I started saving whatever I could. I cut my own expenses. It somehow made me feel safe. I finished my coffee. There was nothing left to ask. "Don't take the day off," I said quietly. "I'm going to the office." "You should go too. We'll talk tonight." She gave a small nod. As I drove to work that morning, I wasn't angry anymore. I was trying to understand. I couldn't focus all morning. I read the same email 3 times without understanding a word. Around lunch, I found Ethan sitting alone with a coffee. "You look terrible," Ethan said. I didn't sleep. Ethan didn't ask any more questions. I told him everything. The secret account, the confrontation, Sophia's confession, her father's visit. When I finished, Ethan sat quietly for a long moment. Finally, he asked, "Do you still love her?" I stared into his coffee. For several seconds, I said nothing. Then I nodded. "Yeah, very much." A faint smile crossed Ethan's face. "That's why this hurts so much, doesn't it?" I nodded again. "I don't know how to continue. How do I build a future with someone knowing that somewhere deep inside, she's still living with that fear?" Ethan thought for a moment. "It doesn't sound like Ryan just took her money." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "He took something much bigger. He made her feel ashamed. Ashamed that someone could fool her so completely. Imagine believing that about yourself for 4 years, not because you lost money, but because you stopped believing your own judgment." I remained silent. Ethan took a sip of his coffee. "I don't know. Maybe if she finally gets closure, she'll trust herself again." Neither of us spoke after that, but for the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't get those words out of his head. The drive home felt longer than usual. The radio was on, but I couldn't remember hearing a single song. Ethan's words kept replaying in my mind. Maybe if she finally gets closure, she'll trust herself again. Until then, I'd been asking myself one question. Could I trust Sophia again? Somewhere along the drive, another question quietly replaced it. Did Sophia even trust herself anymore? I thought about everything she'd told me. The secret account, the depression, the months spent hiding from the world. It had never sounded like someone planning an escape. It sounded like someone who had never stopped surviving. I stopped at a red light and stared out of the windshield. Ryan hadn't just taken her savings. He had taken something far more valuable. Her confidence, her dignity, her belief that she could trust her own judgment. And for years, she had been carrying the shame for a crime someone else had committed. The light turned green. Without thinking, I took the next right. It wasn't the road home. 40 minutes later, I pulled into Michael Bennett's driveway. He opened the door, surprised to see me. "Daniel." I looked at him and said quietly, "I need to know everything. Not about Sophia, about Ryan." Michael stepped aside without saying a word. A few minutes later, Linda joined them in the living room. Sophia's brother Chris arrived shortly after. No one asked why I'd come back. I looked at Chris. "Your father mentioned a lawyer." Chris nodded. "We met him a few times." "Were they confident?" Chris looked at his father before answering. "They believed Ryan hadn't just broken an engagement. They believed he had deliberately deceived Sophia into transferring her money. There were messages, emails, bank records. They thought there was enough to build a case." I listened without interrupting. "What happened?" Chris let out a quiet sigh. "What happened?" "Sophia." He looked toward the hallway. She wasn't thinking about court. She wasn't thinking about money. She was just trying to get through another day. There were mornings she wouldn't even leave her room. Dad and I gathered everything. The lawyer prepared the paperwork. We hoped one day she'd be ready. Chris disappeared upstairs. A minute later, he returned carrying a thick blue folder. He placed it gently on the coffee table. We never threw it away. I rested my hand on the folder. Inside were neatly organized documents, bank statements, transfer records, emails, messages, draft legal papers. Years of silence, preserved in a file. He closed it. "May I take this?" Michael didn't hesitate. "It's yours." I looked surprised. Michael gave me a faint smile. "I don't know what you're thinking, but I trust you." I nodded gratefully. As I reached the front door, Michael spoke one last time. "Whatever you decide, thank you for coming back." I looked down at the folder in my hand, then quietly walked to my car. By the time I reached home, it was already getting dark. Sophia was sitting on the couch. She stood the moment I walked in. Neither of us spoke. I walked to the coffee table and gently placed the blue folder in front of her. Her eyes followed it. "What is this?" I simply nodded toward it. With trembling hands, she opened the folder. The moment she saw the first page, she froze. The old bank statements, the emails, the draft legal papers, documents she hadn't looked at in years. She turned another page, then another. Finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. "Why?" I walked over and sat beside her. "No one gets to make a fool out of my wife and leave her believing it was her fault." She just stared at me. I gently closed the folder. "If you decide to fight, I'll stand beside you." Sophia didn't answer that night. She sat there for a long time, the folder still open on her lap. The next morning, she looked at me and quietly said, "I'll do it." A week later, we were sitting across from a lawyer. He spent nearly an hour reading through the old documents, emails, bank transfers, messages, every promise Ryan had made. Finally, he closed the folder. "You have a case. I can't promise the outcome, but you have enough evidence to fight. It's not going to be easy, but it's worth fighting." Sophia looked at me. I simply nodded. The papers were filed a few days later. 3 days after that, Ryan called. Sophia looked at her phone. Her hands immediately began to shake. She looked at me. I didn't take the phone. I didn't answer it for her. I simply reached across the table and held her hand. After a long moment, she answered. I couldn't hear what Ryan was saying, but I saw the fear return to her face. She listened quietly. Then, for the first time in 4 years, she interrupted him. "No." She ended the call. Her hands were still shaking, but she wasn't crying. A few days later, Ryan's lawyer contacted ours. Then came meetings, documents, statements. Every step seemed designed to wear her down. More than once she looked at me and said, "What if I just stop?" I always gave her the same answer. "If you want to stop, we stop. But don't stop because you're afraid." She never replied. She simply kept going. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, I began noticing little things. She laughed more. She slept through the night. She no longer looked over her shoulder every time her phone rang. Then one evening, after another meeting with the lawyer, she smiled as she got into the car. "I spoke today." I looked at her. I answered every question. I didn't break down. There was something different about her. Not relief, not victory. Pride. Not because she was winning a case, because she had finally stopped running from it. A few weeks later, our lawyer called. Ryan wanted to settle. He knew the evidence was stronger than he'd expected. He knew the case wasn't going away. Sophia looked at me. Years ago, she would have accepted anything just to make it end. This time, she looked at our lawyer and calmly asked, "What do you think is fair?" I smiled. It wasn't the question that mattered. It was the woman who had asked it. As the case became more serious, Ryan began to panic. People started talking. His company became aware of the allegations. For the first time, Ryan sounded desperate. Then he started messaging. At first, he tried to reason with Sophia. "Let's settle this between ourselves." Then they became less friendly. "You're making a mistake." Finally, "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Sophia looked at the screen. For a brief moment, I saw the old fear return. Then she quietly handed the phone to our lawyer. When Ryan finally realized Sophia wasn't facing him alone anymore, the threat stopped. That was the last direct message Ryan ever sent. A few days later, he called me. "Daniel, why are you doing this?" "Come on, Daniel, you both have good jobs. This isn't about the money anymore. Why ruin my life over something that happened 4 years ago?" I stayed quiet. Then I answered, "If this was about the money, I'd have told Sophia to forget all of this and move on." Silence. "You didn't just take her savings. You took her confidence. You made her believe she should be ashamed of something that wasn't her fault. For 4 years, she carried the punishment for your greed." Another long silence. "I'm not fighting for the money. I'm standing beside my wife while she fights for herself." I ended the call. A couple of weeks later, Sophia received a message from a woman named Olivia. Ryan's current girlfriend learned about the legal notice and reached out to Sophia herself. Sophia looked at me. I simply said, "It's your decision." She agreed. When Sophia showed her the emails, the transfers, and the promises Ryan had made years earlier, Olivia became very quiet. She quietly smiled. "He's been asking me to move my savings too." Before making any financial decisions, she ended the relationship. When Ryan realized there was no way to intimidate Sophia anymore, and no way around the evidence, his lawyer approached ours. This time, there were no threats, only settlement offers. A few weeks later, the agreement was signed. Ryan repaid the money with interest. To do it, he sold his car, then his house. Soon after, we heard he'd left the state to start over somewhere else. Neither of us celebrated. By then, Ryan had already become part of the past. A few days after the settlement, I found Sophia sitting on the patio looking at the transfer confirmation on her phone. I sat beside her. After a long silence, she smiled. "I thought getting this money back would change everything." She shook her head. "It didn't." She turned toward me. "You did." I looked at her, confused. She reached for my hand. "Thank you. For listening. For not walking away. For giving me the courage to fight when I couldn't. And for standing with me." I smiled. "You fought. I just stood beside you." She leaned her head against my shoulder. A few moments later, she opened her banking app. I recognized the account immediately, the one that had nearly ended our marriage. She looked at it for several seconds. Then she transferred every dollar into our joint savings account. I looked at her. She smiled. "I don't need a backup plan anymore." A month later, we found ourselves standing in front of the same house we'd visited months earlier. The realtor unlocked the front door and smiled. "So, can you picture your future here?" Sophia looked at me, then reached for my hand. "Yes. This time, I really can." As we walked through that front door together, I realized something. Ryan hadn't lost when he sold his house, or his car. He lost the day Sophia stopped believing his betrayal defined the rest of her life. And I didn't save my wife. I simply stood beside her, while she found the courage to trust again. Sometimes the hardest part of loving someone isn't forgiving what they did, it's understanding why they did it. What would you have done if you were Daniel? If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to Forge Stories, and join us for a new original story every day. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.